guess I can always delete it, right? So I'm not going to repeat everything I just said because I forgot to hit record, but anyway, so that's Paul, great mystery. You know, I don't know that it matters all that much, but the point is this, I think, regarding how the book ends. You know, I've mused over this, Jesus' statement that they would be his witnesses unto the ends of the earth. But they were not his witnesses in Rome. There's no record that Peter was in Rome prior to Paul. So there's more going on in what Jesus said than what we see in Acts, because they didn't take the gospel to the ends of the earth in Acts. They really didn't, unless he means more than just the apostles. They didn't take the gospel to the eastern provinces. Paul did that. He wasn't there at the ascension when Jesus said this. So I'm inclined to think, Acts ends on a very hopeful, positive note about the gospel continuing on. We're now outside. It's no longer, whatever you want to call it, linked with an umbilical cord to the church in Jerusalem. It's got its own destiny, and it's got its own momentum now, as it's made its way through Asia and Macedonia and Greece and now on to Rome. And so it really doesn't matter in that sense, as far as the gospel goes, what happened to Jerusalem. The gospel continues on now to wherever it's going. And the record of the following centuries starkly demonstrates that fact. As the gospel eventually in the early 300s under Constantine will become, Rome was a very, very pagan, Greco-Roman world was very, very pagan, very polytheistic. That will all turn on its head in 325, I think, when Constantine becomes emperor and Christianity becomes, he's devoted to the Christian thing, including its monotheism, very, very devoted to that. Whether he was a Christian is a whole debate on its own, but for whatever reason, he is going to use Christianity in his consolidation of the empire, which is monotheistic. So it's a dramatic flip in the Roman Empire in 325. From polytheistic to monotheistic. I mean, you don't just erase all that polytheism, and I don't really know what happened as far as the polytheism in the mid-Roman Empire. But at any rate, the point is, what happened to Paul in Rome or Peter didn't stop the propagation of the gospel. It's going to continue right on. But I thought it would be useful to just address this issue of the this little event right here, which is just by the end of Paul's first stay in Rome, if there was a second stay. It's only 8 years away, 4 years till the Jewish revolt, when Judea and Galilee are going to be wiped off the face of the earth. Jerusalem, at least, and Judea wiped off the face of the earth. Still going to be Jews there, but there's nothing left of it. And its relevance to the story of the gospel, which it is, but we tend to totally ignore it. So I thought we could take up the issue of the Jewish revolt. It's fascinating history all on its own, but you got to kind of like that stuff. And its relevance to Jesus and his work, both finished and unfinished, because he's not finished yet. So I was talking to Holly. She fell on the sword and listened to some of the stuff that I was thinking about having you watch. There's a 45-minute version of the Siege of Jerusalem. She thought that was too detailed, which I just gave it to her and said, "What do you think?" So I looked at it and said, "Yeah, you really have to be in." I mean, some of us would love that stuff. What happened with the destruction of Jerusalem militarily? It's extraordinary. There's a 30-minute virtual reality video thing. One of the universities did this thing where you can stand on the Antonia Fortress, which overlooks all of Jerusalem, and you can spin the camera around like you're there and look at all the places. And some guy does that and he narrates the armies coming in and everything. It's really fascinating. But that's a half an hour. There's a 15-minute version, a 15-minute documentary that was made in Israel by Israeli scholars. It's got a little too much axe to grind, I guess would be the way to say it. But there's a 22-minute version, 23-minute version, which is a nice synopsis. So what I thought we could do is just do the last 15 or so minutes of that as Vespasian and Titus come in to march against Jerusalem, and then and then what happened as a result of that. Otherwise, we just move on to Romans. But it's 15 minutes. I thought it'd be a nice way to sum up the 60s. Everybody okay? All right. So we're gonna go ahead and play it. I'll put the link in the description of the YouTube of the feed when I get it up on YouTube. So you can just watch it if you want. If you're gonna come in, if somebody comes in on the Zoom feed, you can just watch the video and then turn on the recording again, and I'll have probably a little more to say about it, and then we'll continue on. So I'm gonna go ahead and pause the recording now and start that. I've never actually practiced this. I don't see how to pause. Oh, there it is. Cool. Pausing recording now. Ask your question again, Howard.
Why do we have such specific information for this event, like actual dates?
There are 2 books written. The pastor just said it. There's two books written. 2 of the most important books written in the first century. Certainly the most important books written of this period of Jewish history by a man named Josephus. Josephus was a participant in these events. He was a combatant. He was a Levite, Flavius Josephus. So he became a Roman, not to start at the beginning, but he fought in the Galilean side of this campaign on the side of the Jews. He reneged on a pact to commit suicide, group suicide, like they did at Masada a few years later, which he alluded to. And then he joined the Romans just in time, became a collaborator, and he wrote 2 books, one called The Jewish War and the other called Antiquities, in which he takes up the cause kind of defending the Jews. I've never read them because who wants to read all that? He takes up the cause of defending the Jews against certain charges. But he was a master of self-preservation, because when he was captured, he prophesied that Vespasius would become emperor and that Titus would win. I don't remember what it was, which is exactly what happened. So instead of killing him, instead of executing him, they go, "Oh wow, look at you!" And then he became an important Roman. So anyway, that's where we get all of this stuff from. He is anything but neutral, but he's very useful. Almost everything, maybe everything you heard here comes through the work of Josephus. The numbers are exaggerated, they question some things, but overall, he gives you an eyewitness account of one of the most important events in the history of the nation of Israel.
Why is it called the Jewish revolt when it looks like they're just defending themselves?
They attacked and slaughtered the Romans in Antonia Fortress and other places. When the Romans came in to try, what you didn't see in this was that the Syrian legate, because of the C, I can't remember his name, comes down to try to quell this. They slaughter them too. And so it just goes up and it just goes up.
Revolt in that they wouldn't submit to the Romans.
Yes. It's a revolt from the standpoint of the Romans. You revolt from the standpoint of the people that you're revolting from. And that's what they did. But the important point is, or one of the important points is that they had a lot of trouble here. It was not at all a given that the Romans were going to be able to beat these people. So by a factor of 3 to 1, and they don't have any supply lines. And that's right. And they were non-professionals, combatants, So it's really remarkable from a military standpoint. It's remarkable what they were able to accomplish. I mean, ultimately, I don't know what the Romans would have done if they'd had to send more legions, and they took them 4 legions here, plus the Syrian legate. So what happened was the survivors retreat to Masada, the famous Masada, the hill to the top of the rock, where they commit suicide. Eventually, they see the Romans out there building. This is 73, so 3 years after this. The Romans do the same thing. They build this arch, and so it goes on for 3 months. You can sit there and watch them if you're up there building this siege ramp as death is getting closer and closer to you. So somewhere in there, after they'd spent several months building this thing, they just decided to commit ritual suicide. And when the Romans get there, it's all over. Although even some of that's in doubt now too. But that's the story of Masada in a nutshell. And then later on in 132, there's going to be the famous Bar Kokhba rebellion, where the Jews are actually going to try to take back the Temple Mount. And at that point, Hadrian is the emperor, and he says, "I've had enough of this," and he forbids any Jews from living on the land. And they won't live there again until 1948. until they get it back. I think 48, 47, 47, 48, one of those 2 years, 48, yeah. So it's a remarkable story, with what got kicked in as a result of this, these events that we're going to find out in just a second were prophesied by Jesus. That's the point of this. Why does this matter? We'll get to that in a second. Couple of important points here. August 5th, AD 70. They said they did the sacrificial lamb thing morning and evening all the way through these events until August 5th. I don't remember what date did he say that that the Temple Mount finally fell. It's like September, October. But on August 5th, AD 70, they ran out of lambs. So the last sacrifice in the temple, a sacrificial system which has been superseded 38 years, 38 years earlier by the death of Jesus, finally officially came to an end on August 5th, AD 70. So when Jesus prophesies the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, he's also prophesying the official end of sacrifices, period. It's not like they're going to go on forever making them pointlessly. They come to an end and they can't do it anymore.
Because there's no temple.
There's no temple. So look at this. Let's look at this. I snipped this out. Take a good look at that. Here's the wall, which is an extraordinary. It's Romans, right? It's absolutely extraordinary. This is 8 kilometers, this wall around here. How long did he say it took? 3 days. It's not like they've been sitting around preparing for the last 3 months. They've been working their tails off building siege ramps and, battering rams and stuff like that. But they did this in 3 days. Where did they get the stuff? It's got how many towers? 3, 6. It reminds me of the walls that Caesar built in Gaul when he had Vercingetorix up on the hill. So he built a wall around him in no time. Then they knows the people from Gaul are going to attack from the other side. So he builds another wall on the other side of him, and he entraps himself between the 2 walls, from which he defeats both sides. It's absolutely astonishing. Yeah. It's almost like they've done it before. But anyway, so let's look at this because we want to. Let's see what else I had to say. In the big picture, the gospel never even slows down. It will continue on. None of this matters to the propagation of the gospel. By now, the church is a Gentile church, and off it goes to the races. And we talked about what happened under Constantine and then on and on. Not that
still Christians in Jerusalem at that time.
That's a great question. My hunch would be there were none of them left. James was executed before Paul was. Josephus reports that too. He was called James the Just by the Jewish side for his devotion to the Mosaic law. But they'd finally, the chief priest finally had enough of him. Was that Ananias? And so he had him stoned in Jerusalem about 62. Which actually Josephus thinks may have played a part in the rebellion. They didn't like the fact that he was a popular guy among the Jews. They didn't like the fact that Ananias had done this. And so I think Josephus is the one who says they may have played a role in this, the rebellion in the first place. But at any rate, then there's all kinds of speculation about, but it kind of already had. You see that in Luke, in Acts, where the sort of, what do you call it? The administrative center of the propagation of the gospel moves from Jerusalem. The gospel goes from Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria to the uttermost parts of the earth. In Jesus' way of framing it, in the actual narrative, the gospel moves from Jerusalem to Antioch to Ephesus in terms of proclamation. It's very clear. But here's Josephus on crucifixion in the aftermath of the destruction of Jerusalem. They were first whipped, tormented with all sorts of tortures before they died, and were then crucified before the city wall. It was hoped that the gruesome sight of the countless crosses might move them to surrender. So the soldiers, out of rage and hatred toward the prisoners, nailed those they caught in different postures to the crosses by way of mocking. And their number was so great that there was not enough room for the crosses and not enough crosses for the bodies. just to make a point. The implication here is they're crucifying dead people as well. Because in their culture, shame matters. That matters. What happens after death matters because it's shame. That was the whole point of crucifixion. We might say, well, you're already dead. What difference does it make? That mattered to these people. Okay, so back to the point, back to this amazing picture right here, image. And then there's the two statements by Jesus, Luke chapter 13. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those sent to her. That's his characterization of Jerusalem. It's not the Jerusalemites' characterization of the city. How often I wanted to gather your children together, just as a hen gathers her brood under her wings. You would not have it. Behold, your house is left to you desolate. In Greek, it's really, behold, your house is left to you. And then the English translations supply the word desolate. It actually kind of waters it down. When he says your house is left to you, what he really means is something like God is abandoning you, Jerusalem, which is what results in the desolation, of course. When he approached Jerusalem, so he gets to Jerusalem and he does two things, one before he gets there and one after he gets there. When he approached Jerusalem, he saw the city and wept over it. If you had known in this day, even you, the things that which make for peace, but now they have been hidden from your eyes, for the days will come upon you when your enemies will throw up a barricade against you and surround you and hem you in on every side, and they will level you to the ground and your children within you, and they will not leave in you one stone upon another, because you did not recognize the time of your visitation. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Jerusalem, they went through this in 587. But this is, what a striking fulfillment. It's like he's looking at the picture in front of his eyes. So if you're a secular scholar, what you're going to say, well, is, of course, we don't believe in such things. So the prophecy was put in Jesus' mouth after the events. Well, that doesn't really work either, because what you're saying then is Jesus never said anything like that. But that probably almost certainly is not the case. Even if you're a secular person, it is almost certainly true that Jesus issued a prophecy of destruction against the temple. But he followed it up, which is my point. What happened afterward? What happened after he got into Jerusalem? It doesn't stop there. And I think everybody believes this event happened, even the people that don't believe in Jesus. He entered the temple and began to drive out those who were selling, saying to them, it is written, and my house shall be a house of prayer, but you have made it a robber's den. It's an enacted demonstration of the destruction of the temple. He goes in and like Jeremiah lying on one side, or, building the little city of Jerusalem and then destroying it. That's what Jesus is doing here. He's not just angry. He's making a point, and he's continuing the point he just made. They go back to back. 41 to 44, his prophecy against Jerusalem, and then 45 and 46, this violent act in the temple against the temple institution itself. So it's reinforcing before and after he gets to Jerusalem. So unless you think all of that was put together after these events happened, which nobody thinks all of it, I don't think was that. The problem is, it's just extraordinary that someone could, it's almost too on the mark that he could, it's like he was looking at, it's like he had this bird's eye view from the Antonio Fortress, which we've talked about many times in here. Now, you know why I keep mentioning these places, like the Antonio Fortress. They're so pivotal. When you think about the fact that Antonio Fortress right here, that they destroyed, that they came through to take the Temple Mount, that was the place where Paul gave his oration to the Jews that almost got him killed right on the spot, and the Tribune had to drag him into the building before they killed him. That's where all this took place. And now, just, in that case, 12 years later, these events happen right then and right there.
What Jesus said was referring only to the temple, the stones being torn down, not one stone on another.
He seemed to be talking about all of Jerusalem.
What happened to Jerusalem?
Yeah.
And then we read that verse.
Yeah. So have you seen the Wailing Wall? Have you heard who's heard the expression of the Wailing Wall? Yeah, so what is the Wailing Wall?
Portion of the Temple Mount.
Where did I put it?
Isn't it the wall that divides them from the Jewish people from their temple area?
Yeah, I'm gonna do something dangerous. So this is the Wailing Wall. Why do they call it the Wailing Wall? Well, it's the Western Wall. It's a piece, I don't know where, but it's a piece of the Western Wall. And it survived. So two parts, there's two important, there's lots of archaeological finds. Two of prime importance are the Wailing Wall and the warning inscription, warning Gentiles not to enter into the inner precinct, the inner courtyard. And they both survived. And they're just such graphic illustrations here. You know, the wall of sanctity around the Temple Mount is now known as the Wailing Wall, where mourning happens. And you can watch these Jews do this today, to this day, the ones that are serious about it still. And then the inscription that's been obsoleted through the death and resurrection of Jesus, the Gentiles can come in, you know, and they've survived. It's almost like God wanted to make sure a piece of it survived.
And Gentiles go to the Wailing Wall today?
Yeah, it's a tour. I mean, yeah, it's a tourist. Yeah, you go back and look at them. It's too bad in a sense. There they are.
In Israel, there's a time that they can go and a time the other side can go.
Yeah. Yeah, you can see the you can see the ones, you can see them here wailing. They're doing their ritual. And then there's tourists. You know, this guy's got a backpack on. Well, actually, he's a Jew who's doing the same thing. He's offering his prayers at the Wailing Wall. But it's also, of course, you know, you're not going to keep them away.
Looks like there's a wooden fence built.
Yeah. So here's a Wailing Wall. And what is this right here? It's the Dome of the Rock. It's one of the three most holy Muslim shrines. So it's the stark picture of this tension between two worlds.
But the temple used to be up
Temple used to be up here. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know exactly where this sits in relation to where the Temple Mount was. If you were going to build the temple, where would it have to be? I don't know where this sits. But anyway, the point is just the stark picture of so much, the Wailing Wall, and there's the Temple Mount, and there's the Dome of the Rock sitting right in the middle of it. You know, from the Jews' standpoint, defiling it. From our standpoint, what do we care? You know, the Temple Mount has no theological value to Christians. So, you know, would I rather have it not be there? Probably. But I ain't going to war over it. That's for sure.
But is the temple going to be rebuilt in that area?
Is the temple going to be rebuilt? Is the real question. If the temple is rebuilt, this is where it's going to be rebuilt.
Do I hear that because the sacrifice is going to start up again?
Are the sacrifices going to start? How do you read this stuff? How do you read this stuff in Revelation, right? I mean, in Ezekiel, yeah. So I don't know. And if they do, what do they mean? We already have, so what are we doing? Rooting for sacrifices to start up again as Christians? You know, come on, we've had our sacrifice. The whole book of Hebrews. So anyway, fascinating stuff. What else have I got? Anybody want to say something about this? Whether this is useful? I think it is. I'll post in the description. I'll put a link to the 45-minute. Let's just do it since we got a couple minutes here. The virtual reality one is really interesting.
And I wanted to review a slightly different video where we're visiting the ancient city of Jerusalem in virtual reality. It's a very cool program.
I'll just silence him. So you can see there's the temple, there's the D'Antonio Fortress. So if you're one of these Jews standing, is that a parapet? Is that what that's called? Whatever. I don't know. But if you're standing, now it's the right size. You know, if if you're standing in one of these, you can overlook the entire thing. You can see all the Romans. Look how far out. He said that the two of the Roman legions were 3/4 of a mile out on the western side. That's the eastern side. So there's 3/4 of a mile out this way. Well, they can see that. You can see the Romans. You can see the siege ramps being built. You can see the whole city. You can see them attacking the walls. All of it, all the way. You can see on the other side is the Mount of Olives, right out of the Bible, right out of the New Testament. The Wailing Wall, this is the temple. This is the temple. The Wailing Wall this is the western edge of the Wailing Wall. This is the western edge of the wall, right here. So as I understand it, I could be wrong about this. I got to go look at it, which means it's dangerous because I'm being recorded right now. Then the dome would be up here somewhere. But I got to go back and look at this. I'm not a historian. Who's chatting me? She did ask me if the recording is on. She knows I don't pay attention to chat though. So anyway, this is really good. He goes through all this. See, this over here is the Mount of Olives. Jesus was on the Mount of Olives the night before. Jesus was on the Mount of Olives the night before he died, where the Romans would come in and there would be this siege battle, this pitched battle, that'd be a better word. That's going to occur when the destruction of Jerusalem happens. He's there. He's on all these places that are, he goes into the temple. He pronounces a judgment against Jerusalem. Then he goes into the temple right here, temple precinct. My guess is he's right in there, inner precinct, inner courtyard, committing this kind of symbolic act of violence against the temple, destruction against the temple or something like that. But this, he goes, it's really interesting. He actually takes you through, here's the Kidron Valley on the eastern side. So up here somewhere is up this way is the Mount of Olives. You can just walk through this virtual reality thing. You can go online and do this and literally do it yourself. And if you know something of the history, see how this stuff unfolded. But yeah, so there's the Kidron Valley. So I think the Mount of Olives is right here. Just amazing. But that would be your view. If you're a Jew during this time. He's standing on the edge of the Antonia Fortress. There's the Antonia Fortress again right here, I think. Amazing. And all through that, so let's go back there. All through that time, these sacrifices were still being offered. The morning and evening lamb. Sacrifice of the lamb was still being offered. That's not it. Wherever the temple is in this mess. So then it all goes up in flames, and then that's it. So that's all I got on that. I thought that would be a good way to close out Acts, which ends on this high note. And then that's part of the point, right? I mean, even though Jerusalem is destroyed within a few years, it has no bearing on the propagation of the gospel. The gospel will not be stopped. Did I say something about that?
Also, it is that the problem is people are not forgotten. Because he restores Israel.
That's right. Yes, that's right. It's almost as if something of the agenda for Israel kicked back in after a little less than 1900 year pause. But he worked slow by our standards. And so, but I won't make any guesses, educated or not, regarding how this unfolds from here, except that he's not through with Israel. They're still part of the people of God, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. And I still believe that. But it's an amazing story here, dedication to your tradition. There's also that angle to it, that it's just futile. It's futile from a human standpoint, their opposition, because it's the Romans. And it's futile from a divine standpoint, because it's already been decided in the councils of God what's going to take place from a Christian standpoint. So it's futile. It's just simply futile. Kind of bless their hearts. It's, they're dedicated to their own traditions and their own nation and so forth. But they just missed it. As Jesus says right there, you did not recognize the time of your visitation. And there's no going backward in this. That's it. But I'm not through with you. And I think these Jews that show up at the Wailing Wall, they've got an inkling about that. They don't know how they're going, he's not through with them, in my view, but he's not through with them yet. And he never will be. We'll get into that when we get into Romans 9 through 11, which everybody wants to ignore. We won't. But we'll pick it up next week with Romans chapter 1 intro. You know a lot about Paul, so we won't have to talk about that as much as we would otherwise. I'll have some intro things to say about Romans and Rome and the audience and all that. But hope you got something out of that. And I'll see you next week. I'll put the link. I'll put this up on YouTube later today. And I'll include the link to this video and then also a link to the other two, identifying them, the longer 45-minute one and the virtual reality one. Because if you're into that sort of thing, which I am, I mean, I've seen them all more than once. So, you know, back and forth between Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein and the Siege of Jerusalem, back and forth, back and forth. And then sometimes a Zombieland 2 double tap in there. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording now. Adios.